So I would like to introduce now Veronica Dean, who is a guideline program of the ESC, and she's going to talk to us about the development of the ESC guidelines and the link between guidelines and education. Veronica, you're welcome, and thank you so much for changing your time.
Introduce me as the photographer.
No. Well, that as well, multitasking.
So multitasking is definitely something we do in the guidelines. So I'll lead you through it. So just a little bit of info that you may want to know about the guidelines process. How do we develop the guidelines? How have the guidelines become so popular, the ESC guidelines, which are now world-renowned? So just a few landmarks that you may or may not know about the ESC. So first of all, when it was created was 1950. It was created by 14 national societies, and obviously the first aim of the ESC, the why it was created, was to organize the Congress, which at the time was every other year, then became a yearly Congress. So the European Heart House was created in 1993 here in Sophia Antipolis. So you are sitting in a high-tech park, in case you didn't get a chance to look around. So a high-tech park, and it was under the leadership of Michel Bertrand, one of our most famous French cardiologists, that the land was bought to create the Heart House at that time. So that's how we ended up here. First publication of a guideline was 1994 in the European Heart Journal, and all guidelines subsequently have been published in the European Heart Journal. And the committee to develop the guidelines was created in that year. And it was in about the year 2000 that, under the leadership of the Guidelines Committee, under Jean-Pierre Bassan, that they realized that there needed to be staff, that it was getting to be a question of life and death to have dedicated staff at the Heart House, and that's when I was hired. So that's how we started getting more structured, I would say, in the guidelines writing, development. So as I said, so the Guidelines Committee, which had all sorts of names over the years, but is now called the Committee for Practice Guidelines, was created in 1994, and it really coordinates the development from A to Z of the guidelines. Our present committee is made up of the members that you see on the screen under the leadership of Stefan Windecker. It's a committee that has the same lifespan as the ESC board, and the head of the Guidelines Committee is automatically a board member, an ESC board member. And you can see that there is diverse expertise on our Guidelines Committee. There is really a good span of the cardiovascular disease pathology that is represented, including a nurse. Our present nurse is Donna Fitzsimon, and before that was Christy Deaton. So we've always had a nurse on board our Guidelines Committee, which is a big plus for all of us, of course. And so what are the ESC guidelines? Of course, evidence-based recommendations, as much as evidence as we have, by leading European experts. I'll explain in a minute how they're chosen, to help the end users, so the practicing physician or healthcare professional, weigh the benefits and risks of a particular diagnostic or therapeutic procedure. We have all sorts of derivative products that I'll go over in a minute. So how are the topics chosen? So we have a core curriculum, which is developed by the Education Committee, and we cover 22 out of the 28 topics. You can see that the topics that we do not cover are topics that are covered in all of the guidelines, but don't have a specific guideline dedicated to that topic. So, CCNAP, we have a lot of involvement of your council, of representatives of your councils over the year. We have here the main guidelines where you were involved, or somebody from your council was involved since 2014, so over the last 4 years. either as task force members, so in the writing team, or in the review team, or in the guidelines committee. Okay? Don't hesitate to stop me if anything's unclear, or just raise your hand, and I'm definitely available for questions during my presentation. So that's what I just said. So either as a committee member, task force member, review team, and I will go over. So what's just been published? All 4 of these documents were published in Barcelona. So the valves, the STEMI guidelines, peripheral artery disease, and a focused update on DAPT. We presently are developing still some of the derivative products, including the summary cards, which of course are of interest to you, which I will develop in a few minutes. What are we working on now? So what's going to be out in 2018? So the first one that will be published is the last one on the list, Syncope. We're aiming to have it published in March for the Arrhythmia Congress, the ERA Congress. We should be okay to have it at least published online for the Congress for March. And of course, there will be another big rollout in Munich, at the Munich Congress. But it should be online for the opening day of the ERA Congress in March. And the other ones are myocardial revasc that we do jointly with the thoracic surgeons, hypertension, which we do, of course, with the European Society of Hypertension, CVD and pregnancy, and the 4th edition of the Universal Definition of MI. Okay, so all of these are going through intense review at the moment. All of these documents have gone through at least 1 round of review, and Syncope has already gone through 2 rounds of review. And what are we just triggering off? So for 2019, so as I will explain in a minute, the guidelines take about 2 years to develop from start to finish. So we just triggered off the new team that's going to write the diabetes guidelines. Same thing with acute pulmonary embolism, supraventricular tachycardia. The last edition of that one was in 2003, so that's definitely was due for a revamp. Stable coronary artery disease, and we are about to trigger off the focused update on the lipid guidelines. So what I just said, guidelines take about 2 years, 2 full years from start to finish. So what I mean by start is phase 1, it's setting up the team. Phase 2 is the writing and review, and phase 3, the publication phase. Okay, that's how we cut it up in our process. So once you become a task force member, what's expected of you? So first of all, to be present at all of our face-to-face meetings, all of our telephone conferences, Zoom meetings, video conferences, whatever there may be, to bring the team together, and the subgroups within the task force, of course, that are going to be working on specific chapters. They need to respect their writing assignments. We give them a maximum number of words, and I'll speak about that in a few minutes. And of course, tight deadlines. We have deadlines. We have so many different steps in the guidelines process that deadlines are important for them to respect them. And of course, then we have specific rules such as declarations of interest. We don't want anybody in the team that has a potential bias. So this I will develop in a minute. And then, of course, develop, it's not only the full text, but it's everything that comes afterwards, including presentations at national meetings, including the development of the derivative products, and whatever else they may be, the webinars, et cetera, et cetera. So when the task force members sign up to become task force members, it's approximately a 4-year commitment and a lot of work. It's really, really, truly a lot of work. This is just to illustrate the declarations of interest are not part of the guidelines full text, but are in a PDF document on the ESC website. And so what do we accept? So we do not accept anybody that has a part-time employment for a pharmaceutical industry or of course, device industry, no significant stop of ownership, and no patent, so no intellectual property that has a direct relationship to the topic of the guidelines. So that we do not accept. And when a task force member is invited to the task force, of course, we look at the year before. The present year, of course, depending on the month that the guidelines start, the task force starts, but of course the year before as well. Okay? Confidentiality, everything that goes on within the team stays within the team. We're very strict on that. We've had in the past to let go of certain people in task forces because we realized that they were writing, and you can understand that when you're sitting around the table with all of these experts, you know, and you're learning so much because they're learning a lot from each other, exchanging, they get a lot of ideas. You know, it triggers off thinking processes. They want to write, you know, a paper on, you know, what they heard because then they have their own point of view. You know, I think it's very stimulating, and a lot of you in the room can testify to that. So we really keep what goes on in the task force confidential until the date of publication. And that is something that we repeat because, you know, because this emulation, I would say, Mary, I don't know if that's the right word in English, but this triggering off of all this, these brain cells, I mean, you know, it's... So everything that goes on, the topic, we ask the task force members not to publish on the topic while the task force is working. Recommendation tables. So you know that these are what we base our guideline recommendations on. This is the traffic light. Green, go. Orange, yellow. We have now differentiated between the two. Think. Red, don't go. So when you're reading, of course, the recommendation tables, it's quite visual. And this year, we differentiated between 2A and 2B. So 2A is yellow, 2B is orange. I don't know if you'd noticed that. This is new in this year's guidelines, just to make it even clearer. And of course, the levels of evidence. The recommendation tables also, we get a lot of feedback. Over the last 2 days, we had our national guideline coordinators. So we have one guideline coordinator in each of our member countries, the 56 ESC member countries, who is our main entry points for all guideline matters, and we bring them in-house once a year. They were here over the past 2 days. We got a lot of feedback from them, which we will try to implement, of course, for next year's guidelines. So one of the comments that we gotten last year was the recommendation tables are hard to read. The writing's too small. So if you remember, we had a third column, which was the reference column. We did away with that, and we now have the references immediately behind the recommendation tables, or the recommendations, actually, the wording. So we did away, so we were able to enlarge the writing, which makes it more readable. So that was a plus. And another comment that we got, which we had in some guidelines and we're now implementing into all guidelines, is a central illustration. This one's taken from the DAPT focused update that we just published, and we're trying to make that as attractive as possible. And this team, I mean, I was with them when they worked on this table. It was an incredible job to have all of the trials laid out in one central illustration. I think they did a fantastic job. I think all of the illustrations actually in this document. If you're not familiar with it, Catherine has some on the table outside. Definitely pick it up. The illustrations are fabulous. And then we're trying to make the figures more and more attractive. And you can see this is the first time we actually had a figure like this one, where we actually had the recommendation, the classes, and the levels of evidence within the figure. So this has inspired a lot more of the teams. I show this figure to every team that's ongoing at the moment, because I think this is a great way to go, and it's just so visual. We're changing the layout of the figures as well. This was triggered off by our app. Our guidelines app is going to be CE certified within the next couple of months. And to be able to get the CE certification, we have to go with certain designs of the figures. So it's made us rethink the layout And actually, it's great. I think it's just so much clearer. You know, this is a figure taken out of the valve guidelines, and this is the way that we would have done it in the past, and this is the way we actually did it. And you can see just how much clearer it is. So I think we're improving on that as well. Voting on recommendations also. You can imagine that not everybody in the room, I mean, you know, some of you were in the prevention guidelines. We have 10 different specialties sitting around the room in the prevention guidelines, each with their own opinion. So we're trying to enforce more and more within the guidelines task forces, and I just did it for the hypertension task force, is having the task force members vote on the recommendations. Because very often, since I said, you know, the writing process lasts for 2 years, so basically the writing process lasts for about 1.5 years from start to finish. And what was decided in the meeting at the beginning of the writing process, you kind of tend to forget later on, you know, 6 months or 1 year down the line. So we're trying to really get the task forces to vote, so it's kind of minuting the decisions of the task force. And also when the review comments come back to the task force, then the task force members have the actual minutes of why they came to that decision, the percentage also of task force members. And what the guidelines committee tries to enforce is that there has to be at least 75% agreement from the task force members for a recommendation to go through at a certain class and level. So that's how we function. We also have a new section, which we got very, very positive feedback from our national coordinators yesterday, is a what's new section. You know, why an update or a new version of the guidelines was needed. And you will see from the new guidelines, or you will have seen, and this was triggered off by the STEMI guidelines, actually the STEMI task force. They did a fantastic what's new, illustrating it with the color coding, of course, of the recommendations. So in one eyesight, you really see why these guidelines were needed and how the recommendations may have been altered either for stronger or weaker classes of recommendation. So we're now asking all of our guideline task forces to do this in the introduction, which I think is a very nice illustration. The other thing that we have, and we were debating within the guidelines committee whether to keep this because we were told by several people that it was kind of redundant. So at the end of the guidelines full text, we have to do and not to do messages. So these are the class 1 and class 3, the do's and don'ts of the guidelines that we extract from the different sections and put into one piece at the very end. This is just before the references. And a lot of people were saying it's redundant. You know, those are already, all these messages are already in the guidelines. It just makes the guidelines a couple pages longer. So we had a vote yesterday, and the majority of people said, no, we still need them. You know, this is really a great way to end the guidelines, is to have the do's and don'ts. So, voila, we'll keep them. Gaps in evidence. So these are highlighted. So when the task force is writing the recommendations, whenever they feel they don't have enough evidence, we've asked them to highlight these gaps in evidence, which I think is great for the end user also to know why there wasn't any recommendations on certain points that they might also be questioning. That's in the majority of cases. And these are great topics for research. We know now that they're used. They're used also by the industry. You know, where is a trial needed, or where is research needed? So don't, you know, hesitate to pass those on as well. And these are part of another document that we call the essential messages that I'll describe in a second. The key messages also. We debated whether to have the key messages at the end of each section or all grouped together at the end. And it's about a 50-50 vote, whether it should be at the end of each section or all grouped together. So we're really leaving it up to the task forces, although the guidelines committee has a preference of having them all grouped at the end. But because we have them all grouped, in any case, in the essential messages, you can draw them from there as well. And these are used a lot by students to review for exams and for teachers to derive their exam questions from. So a good educational tool. Gender differences. This is something that was really brought forward by the team that's writing the guidelines on pregnancy. They wanted to highlight that it's not because you don't have evidence that you shouldn't talk about it. So we're really trying to enforce it within our different task forces and tell the guideline writers that it should be highlighted when we know there is a difference and we don't have evidence, or we suspect there might be differences between men and women, to highlight that. So this, I've already told you, the do's and don'ts. Overlap. As you know, there are many topics that overlap. We've realized in the past that we were not careful enough about the different messages that overlapped between one topic and another. So within the Guidelines Committee, we have an overlap task force, so a subcommittee, I would say, of these four gentlemen who go through the different documents, whether they're past, present, or future, and highlight the differences. And we also have, of course, the chairs of the different guidelines review each other's guidelines whenever there is overlap. So we're trying to be much more careful about having no divergence. And if there is divergence, because one guideline can still be present on the website, can still be alive, but things may have evolved. And so these differences are explained. So that is something we're much more careful about. And the Guidelines Committee also oversees any of the position papers or consensus documents that are written by the different subspecialty groups within the ESC as well. So whenever there is, we get the tables of contents of these subspecialty documents that are submitted to the Guidelines Committee. If we see that there might be overlap with a guideline, then we have somebody from the Guidelines Committee or the task force or both review these documents. So we're really trying to have synchronized, homogeneous messages within, across the ESC, all of the scientific documents within the ESC. Also, what I wanted to make you aware of, if you haven't seen them, because we're really working with our publisher to make these companion, what we call companion papers to the guidelines, much more user-friendly and accessible. So these are varied depending on the topics, depending on the task forces. They can be questions and answers. There are some patient forms that go along with some guidelines. The questions and answers, I think, for you guys are really a great source of knowledge as well. There are clinical cases. The DAPT task force, because it's such a new topic, decided that they didn't have enough evidence, they didn't have enough really clinical knowledge. So we sent out a call for clinical cases last year, about a year and a half before the guidelines were published. We got about 38 or 39 cases, of which 14 were kept, and they illustrate the focused update on DAPT. So if you haven't seen those documents, definitely go on the web and look for them. They're what we call companion documents, and they really provide practical guidance that is really related to the guidelines documents. Our new baby is another companion. For the moment, I would call it a companion document. If the textbook people were here, they would kill me. But at the what we have been also criticized is that the guidelines were too long. That the guidelines were another form of a textbook. This came back over the years. So Alec Vahagnon, who was the chair of the Guidelines Committee many years ago, then chair of the Education Committee, and now chair of the registries, I think Bernard Jung mentioned him earlier today. He decided that his big battle was going to be to shorten the guidelines and to have a direct link with the textbook, where all of the textbook material that was previously in the guidelines would be from now on. So we now have a direct correlation between the teams that write the textbook chapter and the team that write the guidelines as well. Most of the people are common, do the job, so they're doing both jobs in parallel. And we have specific sections, so the definition, all of the explanation of the pathology will be in the textbook, and all of the practical part of the pathology will be in the guidelines. So this started this year with the valves and the PAD guidelines, and we were too quick for the textbook producers. The actual new textbook will be launched in March 2018, but the textbook chapters on valves and PAD is already available online. And at the moment, there are an addenda to the guidelines. So they've been formatted the content is there, but they will be revamped to fit with the textbook design as of March. Now, we realized, and we got this feedback yesterday from our coordinators, that a lot of people didn't know about it. And even if you did know about it, it was hard to find on the EHJ website. So I've just got confirmed by OUP, our publisher, today, that before Christmas, there will be 2 big red buttons added into the guideline document that you will press, and it will lead you to the textbook chapter and back. They will be transformed into an icon when the textbook is actually launched in March, a more visual icon, but it is available. So I really wanted to make you aware of that, because that's really good background material. So, as far as the review is concerned, how do we review our guidelines? So what I forgot to tell you is that a typical task force is made up between 20 and 25 members. So that's the writing team. The review team is anywhere between 70 and I think we're at 140 people for the hypertension guidelines. So that's our team. So when we're criticized about, one person in the task force being biased, you can imagine that there's, potentially 160 or more other people on that team that, that are going to dilute that potential bias. So, that that's really our check and balance within the guidelines writing teams. And so how are these review teams made up? So we have, of course, members from our guidelines committee. And as I said, even our subgroup, which is on the overlap. We have people from our national cardiac societies. So we give each one of our 56-member countries one seat in the review team. So we have potentially 56 members, and we calculated it, I was telling them yesterday, we have between 50 and 52 per topic that answer positively and give us the name of a person. So, it helps also in the implementation, dissemination and implementation. If somebody from the National Society has been involved in the development process, you can imagine, and then usually is involved also in the translation or at least the dissemination of the guidelines, or at least of the full text or pocket guidelines. Then, of course, we have the subspecialty groups. So this is where you guys are often involved. So we sometimes, as I showed you earlier, we sometimes have a member of CCNAP involved in the writing and or review teams. And then, of course, we have additional experts depending on the topic. So that's how we make up our review teams. And as I said, they can be between 70 and I think the top that we've reached, if I'm not wrong, is hypertension right now, 140 reviewers. So how do we divide then our review team? So we have the global reviewers that will review the entire document. So take the seat of the end user. Then we have our focused reviewers. So we could have somebody, for example, from the working group of pharmacology who will review the dosages, or somebody from heart failure, or somebody from CCNAP, who will review specific sections and subsections in the document. Of course, they can review the entire document, but we really want them to focus using their expertise. And then, of course, we have our National Society reviewers who will review the do's and don'ts, so Class 1 and Class 3 recommendations. And all of these people are involved, of course, have their names on the document. So you can imagine in the past, we used to have all of our reviewers on the front page, but by the time we had everybody named, the poor end user had to go through about 5 pages of names to get to the actual guidelines. So as of 2 years ago, our guidelines committee decided to have on the front page only the document writers, so the task force, and the peer reviewers. The guidelines committee and the National Society reviewers come in the back in the addendum just before the references. So we usually try to limit our front pages to 2 maximum. But what I wanted to highlight is that all reviewers are also indexed in PubMed. So that's a nice incentive to do the job. Educational products. So we got a funny feedback from a lot of our national societies, or at least people on the stands. You will have noticed that the branding has changed. The whole ESC branding has changed, and therefore, because of the corporate branding, we changed also the branding of our pocket guidelines. And we got feedback even from Jeroen Bax, our president, who was at a couple meetings just after the ESC Congress, and said that people were not picking them up from the stands and saying, give us the pocket guidelines, please. And my colleagues saying, but these are the pockets. No, we want the real ones. You know, that's how strong our previous branding was, which is funny. It started with the first pocket guidelines. So this is our new branding. Our app also has a new logo. So all of our products now have this corporate branding. So this is what we like to call our guidelines family, with all of the babies or derivative products of our full text. We're also very much on Twitter, so Twitter, Facebook. We have one of our guideline committee members who works with our media people for tweets and Facebook chats and answers to guidelines, you know, sending out main messages, etc. CME questions. We used to have the guidelines accredited by EBAC. The ESC has changed CME providers. For the moment, we have the CME questions available for the 2017 guidelines, but they're just not available to the public yet. But they will be as of January, from what we've been told. The reason is we used to have them on the OUP website, but it was not at all user-friendly. You had to have a subscription to the EHJ to access these CME questions, and we've now decided to bring them home to the ESCAL platform. So they will be available as of January, from what we've been promised. The slide sets, do not hesitate to use these for your talks. We've had them revamped. We try to limit the slide sets to 60 slides, but sometimes we go a little bit overboard. But what you will have noticed is that we now have our slides available. We did this year in Barcelona. They were put online when the guidelines were put online during the Congress. We've had them done by a professional agency, and we've had super positive feedback. We've seen it from the downloads. They're really fantastic slides. So don't hesitate. They're in PowerPoint. Each slide is, of course, individually protected, so they can't be, the slides themselves can't be altered, but they are really in a PowerPoint presentation and downloadable from the website. So don't hesitate to use them for any need you might have. The essential messages, as I said before, are made up. It's a web-based tool, and it's made up of the main messages in the guidelines and the gaps in evidence. And then, of course, what was made by our guidelines committee, actually, with the help of Christy Deaton, she helped to make the first one, is a summary card. And I know that this is a nice CCNAP project. And I need to tell you also that a lot of our coordinators yesterday didn't even know these existed. So I had a lot of interest from them saying that they'd like to translate them. So I've told all of them that they have to go through CCNAP to make sure that you're not doing the job twice, because I know that a lot of CCNAP members are looking into translating these cards as well. And we had a proposal yesterday from one of our committee members also to make them maybe a little bit more elaborate and go maybe a little bit further. And so Donna will definitely be involved in that project. So do not hesitate also to pass these around. They're on the web. They're freely downloadable. And then, of course, our Guidelines app. Our Guidelines app, we're very proud of this app. We try to improve it every year. It's free. We have over 100,000 users now worldwide of the app. And we're working on new features. One of the new features that's going to come live is videos. First, sorry, I'm going the wrong order. World Cardio Agenda. So don't hesitate if you're doing any guidelines-related meetings at home. I know this is a train the trainers, so you obviously will be. Pass us the info. We'll push it on the app. Don't hesitate to use our Guidelines app. We will have this cardio agenda up very, very shortly. So any guidelines-related activities, dates, give them to us and we'll put them on there. We're going to have videos as well, guidelines-related videos that we will have in a specific folder, and also under each dedicated topic, and I'll speak about that in a second. We're also going to have a web version of our app. This was a great plus for us. We've been asking for it, but the ESC leadership for the moment had been against it, but we got the okay. So there will be a web version. It's almost ready to go with all of the interactive tools on it. And a Windows 10 version, because we know that Windows 10 is used on a lot of devices within the hospitals. Just a few statistics of the app, which I thought might be interesting to share with you. First of all, this is languages per device. So you see that the majority of our users have English as a language on their device, whether it's a smartphone or a tablet. You will see that the most of the users are under 35 or 40 years of age, actually, and a majority of males. So don't hesitate to push your female counterparts. But what I wanted to share with you is that we didn't know if we had saturated the potential or the market of potential users of our app. But we haven't. It just keeps growing over the years, with, of course, a peak at the Congress. But what I got from our statistics, which is quite interesting, so these are the top using countries of our app. So you have in orange the number of app users, and in red the number of cardiologists in that country. So you see, for example, for Italy, which is our biggest users, we haven't even reached half of the potential. This is just cardiologists, and this is only the info that we have. So, for example, for Egypt, we do not have the statistics on how many cardiologists are in Egypt. But it'd be interesting also to see how many members of CCNAP are using the app. So we'll try and maybe get those statistics as well. But you can see that there's still a lot of room for growth. And of course, a peak in first users and returning users during the Congress, you can see. So our aim for next year is to try and get this peak higher at different times of the year, not only at the annual Congress. And I wanted to share with you, because I had a couple feedback from Catherine that a couple people, were asking about the atrial fibrillation. There's a project, in case you haven't seen it. Oops, Charlie, the slides are turning. There is a project which is called Catch Me. There are two apps that are available. One is the Atrial Fibrillation Manager, and the other one is a patient app. I definitely invite you, I don't know why the slide won't stay on. I definitely invite you to download these two apps. They are free to download, both on iOS devices and Androids. And they are really, really educational. The manager is for healthcare professionals, and My AF is for the patients. So now, I'm sorry I'm not super knowledgeable about what's coming up next, a little bit, but I'm replacing somebody who was supposed to do this presentation. But it goes very well with the presentation that you heard earlier on today from Bernard Jung about this synergy between the different activities, scientific activities of the ESC. So the first thing I wanted to tell you is that the educational offer at the ESC is solely based on guidelines. So everything that the Education Committee offers is based on guidelines. And I'm going to go through some of the activities that are offered and just remind you of the education. So the education, of course, is the key mission of the ESC, whether it's through the Congress, the guidelines, and everything else that the ESC does is for educational purposes. And our aim is to be recognized as a leading authority, of course, in cardiovascular health. So there are many training classes. There is a huge portfolio of different classes that are available. As I said, around, of course, the guidelines. There is the ESCAL platform that is free for ESC professional members. As I said before, the CME questions, so accreditation, answering guideline questions or questions on guidelines will be available soon. There are very specific areas. I know that some of, does CCNAP, Mary, does CCNAP have a place on the ESCAL platform? Do you know? Okay. So this is what, so on this part, Laura, is that it? Yeah. Okay. And of course, there are many webinars that are available. These are free of charge as well. For the moment, they are. They're all based on the guidelines. So questions and answers, they're interactive sessions. So I definitely encourage you to participate in these webinars. As Laura said, so clinical case gallery. And this is a great also source of knowledge. I took a screenshot of the webpage, which Guidelines into Practice track. If you want to learn something or everything that you need to know on a specific topic, you will see that on this page you have, if you click on the right-hand side on the different topics, it will lead you through to all of the presentations that have been done throughout all ESC congresses, whether it's the Heart Failure Congress, the Prevention Congress, etc., as well as the Annual Congress. You have all of the presentations available in one place. So this is a great, great resource. And you will see on the bottom left that we have quick links also to the videos that I was talking about earlier, which will be available in the app very soon. So here we have Helmut Baumgartner being interviewed as he was the chair to the valve guidelines. He's being interviewed. You have direct access to the guidelines. And I wanted to point out that you also have direct access to the summary cards from this link. So this is a great page to put in your favorites. And of course, there is a live event endorsement from the ESC. So this may be something of interest when you're organizing your meetings within your countries. The ESC does endorse live events. So you have the information here. There are also European exams that are available. So this is all on the website. And of course, educational benefits for professional membership. I think that's about all that I wanted to share with you. I don't know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Veronica. You certainly run us through all that, the development and And the link with education, certainly you've been very busy, and it just shows how the ESC has developed over the years. My goodness, so much has come out of it. I'm just out of interest, I'm just wondering, what was the first guideline in 1994?
I think it was the prevention guideline.
Was it? Okay.
I think prevention was the very first one.
Yeah.
Ian Graham was really.
I wasn't
I think
sure.
the trigger to the first guidelines. Huh?
Yes.
They were, of course, in a very different format with
Yeah.
you know. But
Lady was the chair, wasn't
yeah, absolutely.
So there's a bit of history of
Yeah.
yeah.
But what I
ESC.
really wanted to highlight in my presentation is all the checks and balances that go through writing
absolutely.
the guidelines now.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't realize
No.
what's behind it and the strict rules that we enforce in writing the guidelines. And I think that's very, very important message to pass on.
And so many people involved in it as well. It's huge.
Yeah.
To coordinate all that as well must be difficult.
No, it keeps us busy.
Okay, certainly.
Never a boring moment
No.
in the guidelines world, that's for
No.
sure.
Any questions from the room? No?
All right, well,
Just-
thank you.
Can I just say,
Don't-
just when you were talking about the translations there of the summary cards, because I know, Gabby, weren't you from Switzerland? Did you translated them? Wasn't there? Not yet, okay. Because I know, yeah, Donna, sorry.
No, sorry, finish that point.
Yeah?
Because I just wanted to ask you, Veronica, what would you, if you had a wish for this room, what would it be? You know, what do you need most from us as manager of all?
Well, keep being involved, for sure. I mean, it's funny, I shouldn't say this, but it's true that when new task force chairs, when we're discussing on, what specialty groups need to be involved, when it comes, depending on the chairs, to involving CCNAP, some of them don't immediately see what, CCNAP can bring to the guidelines group. But I was just telling Catriona that I just got off the phone with a new group that's being set up, and one of the chairs, who was a past chair of a guideline that we're just starting the update of, actually said that the nurse that was involved in those guidelines actually wrote the best piece. So that's what I would answer to your question. So definitely that, and to pass the word on, because nurses have got such an important role in disseminating the guidelines messages, and you guys are part of the check and balance for the doctors as well. Huh? Yeah. I think that was greatly illustrated by the videos that you did. Greatly illustrated, and if you haven't seen those videos, definitely look at them. I think they're great, and pass them on. So yeah, I think your role is primordial, as you say in French.
Oh, what does that mean?
Primordial, primary.
Oh, primary. Very good. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, Veronica. That was very informative, and really appreciate you coming here today to speak from your very busy schedule, I know.